Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of perseverance, ambition, and self-discovery. Today's story is about a young woman who faced rejection from the very people she thought would always support her, her family. Kicked out with nothing but a suitcase and $110, she embarked on a journey that would challenge her, break her, and ultimately transform her into a force to be reckoned with. Join us as we follow her incredible journey of turning hardship into success, proving that true worth lies in what you dare to build. Subscribe to the channel to start today's story. They say the moment you hit rock bottom is when you discover the true nature of those you thought always loved you. For me, that moment came when I was kicked out of my family home by the person who should have been the first to support me, my father. I had just turned 23. I had just graduated with honors in energy engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, but none of that seemed to matter to my father. Henry Pierce, the CEO of Pierce Financial Group, a company that spanned multiple generations. He had always been fixated on one thing: business. In his eyes, the only worthy career for his children was in the financial world, working for his company, manipulating markets, and chasing after billion-dollar deals. But I was different. I didn't want to live my life counting other people's money. I wanted to create something real, something that mattered. I wanted to innovate, to develop sustainable energy solutions that could change the world. When I told him about my dream, about my desire to contribute to a better future, he mocked me, dismissing it as wishful thinking and a career that would never earn a dime. I remember him sneering as he told me I would live like a plumber if I pursued engineering. His words pierced me more deeply than I had ever expected. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. My father hadn't even bothered to show up at my graduation ceremony. Instead, he claimed he had an important meeting with senior stakeholders at the company. The absence of support from him, and from my mother, who always stayed silent and sided with him, hit me harder than I could have imagined. I stood there alone, in front of my professors, my peers, and their families. My mother, sitting in her corner with a martini in hand, turned away whenever our eyes met. She avoided the reality of what was happening in front of her. Later, when I returned home, I found myself standing in the grand foyer of our $8 million mansion, holding onto the handle of an old suitcase, the only thing I had left from my college years. Behind me, my father's portrait of his father, the man who had built this empire, hung on the wall, staring down at me with a look that seemed to judge me from beyond the grave. My father stood in front of me, a stern expression on his face. There was no pride in his eyes, no joy for my accomplishments. His gaze was cold and devoid of love. "You're worth this much," he said, throwing a thin wad of cash in my face. His voice was cold, harsh. "A useless brat like you is lucky if you end up changing light bulbs for other people." I stood frozen. It wasn't the money, it was the sting of those words, sharp and cutting like a blade to my pride. There was no congratulation, no warmth, no acknowledgement of what I had worked so hard for. Just dismissal. I picked up the money from the cold marble floor, my fingers trembling, not out of fear, but from the sheer realization of what was happening. I wasn't just being rejected. I was being discarded. "I don't need your permission to succeed," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos I felt inside. I looked him in the eye, defying him, but he waved me off, dismissing me as one might do with a beggar. "Get out," he spat, his voice growing louder. "And don't you dare use the Pierce name to get a job or build anything. No one will open doors for you without my name behind you." With nothing but my one suitcase, my engineering degree, and $110 in my wallet, I walked out of the mansion, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind me. The sound echoed in my ears like the final sentence of a trial. I had no home to return to, no savings, no car. The life I had known, everything I had worked for, was gone. I found myself standing in the streets of a city that once felt like home, now a stranger in my own life. The streets, once familiar, now seemed cold and distant, just like the family I had been born into. I had nothing but a fragile hope in my heart, the hope that my dreams, my ideas, my determination to make something of myself, could carry me through. That night, as I slept in a bus station with nothing but my laptop and the energy storage system design I had spent my entire senior year working on, I knew one thing for certain: I would never go back to that mansion. I would never let them define my worth again. I was going to prove them wrong. I didn't need their approval to build something great. I would make them see that I was worth more than they ever imagined. And in that cold, empty bus station, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let their rejection be the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The bus ride from Denver to San Jose felt like it took a lifetime. 10 hours, to be exact. I didn't sleep much, my mind kept racing, wondering how I had ended up here, alone, with only a few crumpled bills and my dreams. I didn't have a plan beyond the hope that Silicon Valley, the so-called cradle of big dreamers, might be the place where my idea could take root. When I arrived, the city felt alive with the pulse of possibility. Neon lights flickered on the streets. The tech billboards loomed overhead. And everywhere I looked, I saw people hustling, dreamers, like me, chasing after something big. But I wasn't just chasing a dream. I was fighting for my life. For my worth. I checked my wallet, $80. That was all I had after buying my bus ticket and grabbing a sandwich on the way. No family, no friends here, just me, a laptop full of blueprints, and a shaky belief that maybe, just maybe, I could turn this idea into something that mattered. That night, I slept in a park near El Camino Real, curled up on a cold bench, clutching my backpack as if it contained the only thing that mattered in the world. I didn't even sleep well. Every unfamiliar sound, every rustling leaf, every passing stranger made my heart race. I was terrified of someone stealing my laptop. It held everything, the energy storage system design that had consumed my thoughts for the past year. The next morning, I dragged myself into a small coffee shop. Willow Beans. It was tucked between two old office buildings. And the warm, inviting smell of coffee hit me the moment I stepped inside. I didn't intend to stay for long. Just a quick cup of coffee to warm up. But when I saw the sign for free Wi-Fi and a power outlet, I realized I could use the place to work. To think. It was there that I met Sarah. She was the barista, about my age, with messy brown curls and wary eyes that suggested she had seen a lot of the world's harshness herself. She didn't seem unfriendly, but she was cautious. Hey, if you're going to camp out here with just one Americano, at least don't hog the whole table, she said as she wiped down the espresso machine, which was hissing like it might explode any moment. I sighed, closed my laptop, and stood up to leave. But as I did, the machine let out a loud groan and splattered steaming brown liquid all over the counter. It had broken again. Great, Sarah muttered, giving it a light kick. Not this again. I glanced at the machine and, without thinking, an idea flashed through my mind. I can try to fix it, I said. She stared at me like I was crazy. Who do you think you are? Some kind of HVAC engineer? Close. I'm an energy engineer, just graduated from Berkeley, I replied, my voice a little more confident than I felt. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, sizing me up. Then, she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. All right, if you can get this monster up and running in 20 minutes. I'll talk to the manager and see if there's room for you to sleep in the storage. But if you break it worse, I'm calling the cops. I smiled weakly and pulled a screwdriver from my backpack. I always carried one with me. It was a habit I had picked up in college. 15 minutes later, the machine hummed back to life, pouring coffee smoothly like it had never been broken in the first place. Sarah's jaw dropped. You just saved the whole store. The manager, Carlos, a Mexican man with kind eyes, came over after hearing the story and led me to the back storage room. It was small, filled with coffee bags and industrial toilet paper rolls. But it was clean, dry, and, at that moment, it felt like a 5-star hotel to me. I started working part-time at Willow Beans, fixing small things, cleaning machines, and sometimes helping with orders during rush hour. At night, I crawled into the storage room, opened my laptop, and kept redrawing my energy storage system design. I had no lab, no research funding, and no one else backing me. But I had my idea, and I wasn't about to let it die. Sarah often brought me leftover muffins at the end of the day and would sit on the floor, peeking over my shoulder at the screen. One day, she asked, "What's that?" I didn't look up. The future. If I could pull this off. I thought, it could change the electricity industry. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. She laughed. Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But you do seem pretty serious about it. I smiled softly. I don't have a choice. They threw me out because they thought I was a failure. Now I'm going to prove how wrong they were. Sarah didn't respond right away. After a pause, she said, "Then you need to survive first. The future sounds expensive." Her words were more accurate than anything I'd ever heard from a professor. At that moment, I had only $38 left in my wallet. But I had my design, my brain, a place to sleep, and for the first time in days, I had someone who believed in me, not because of my last name, not because of my connections, but because she saw something in me that I was struggling to believe myself. I was exhausted, living on a razor-thin edge between obsession and desperation. But I was no longer alone. I had a chance, and for the first time in my life. That was enough. 3 months passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Each day was a blur of exhaustion, small victories, and endless failures. By day, I scrubbed machines, fixed pipes, and helped out with orders. By night, I buried myself in my laptop, refining the design for my energy storage system. I was working in the storage room at Willow Beans, surviving on cheap sandwiches and coffee. My only focus, the energy system I had spent so many sleepless nights perfecting. But in those quiet moments, I couldn't help but think of the world I had left behind. Of the mansion I had once called home. Of the parents who had cast me out, believing I would never amount to anything. I couldn't forget my father's face when he threw that $110 at me. But I also couldn't forget the fire burning inside me, the fire that told me I had more to offer than they ever realized. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to succeed. And they would have to see it. Then, one rainy morning, while I was fixing a receipt printer for a man named Ethan Rhodes, something unexpected happened. Ethan was the owner of a small startup specializing in energy measurement devices. As I helped him troubleshoot an electrical error in the machine, his eyes shifted. For the first time, he didn't see me as just a low-level worker. He looked at me like he saw something more. "You're really an engineer?" Ethan asked, surprised and skeptical. I wiped my hands on a grease-stained rag, giving him a crooked smile. "Graduated from Berkeley, energy systems major. And you're working here?" he asked, looking me up and down. I nodded. Not everyone is born wrapped in velvet. There was a long silence before he handed me his business card. "I want you to meet someone. If what you're saying is true, she'll be interested." The person he referred to was Professor Carol Jenkins, a molecular research specialist at Stanford University. A week later, I was sitting across from her in her office, feeling the weight of every failure, every rejection, every moment of doubt. "Tell me your idea," she said, her voice calm but measured. Her piercing eyes seemed to cut right through me. I explained the design for the molecular battery, how it was based on a nanoporous structure that allowed renewable energy to be stored without heat loss. Something that lithium-ion batteries could never do. I laid out the theory, the calculations, everything I had worked on for the past year. Professor Jenkins didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. She read through my notes, scrutinized every equation, and after what seemed like forever, she spoke. "Theoretically, it's impressive, but has anyone validated this model?" "No," I said, my heart sinking, "because no one believes in it." She looked up at me then, and to my surprise, she smiled. "I know a place that could help you validate it, but I won't hold your hand to get there." if you're not ready to work like a monster for the next year, forget it. I sat up straighter. I've been living in a storage room for the last 3 months, cleaning coffee machines and fixing pipes just to survive. I'm ready. 3 days later, I received an email granting me access to the Advanced Materials Lab at UC Berkeley as an independent research collaborator. It was a huge breakthrough. But the real work had only just begun. I didn't quit my part-time job at Willow Beans. I needed the money to survive. But outside of my shifts at the coffee shop, I immersed myself in the lab, pouring everything I had into my project. I worked 16 hours a day, sleeping barely 3 hours each night. I took on freelance gigs, fixing circuit boards and designing power supply systems, just to keep my head above water. Every test I ran, every simulation, was filled with failure, but I never stopped. I couldn't. I had come too far to give up now. And one night, after hundreds of attempts, it happened. I finally saw the results I had been dreaming of. An energy storage efficiency of 98.7%. Something that no one had ever achieved before. I could hardly believe my eyes. I triple-checked the results, then printed them out and took them straight to Professor Jenkins's office. When she looked at the data, her expression changed. She raised her head slowly, narrowing her eyes. "This isn't just a breakthrough," she said softly. "This is a revolution." I trembled as I leaned against the wall. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had finally succeeded at something. I had proved them wrong. As I stood before the investors at Orion Capital, the venture firm that had finally agreed to meet with me, I felt a calm resolve that I hadn't known before. The months of rejection, the sleepless nights, the loneliness, it had all led me to this moment. I wasn't just pitching a new energy storage system, I was pitching my future. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of everything I had sacrificed to get here. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the room with a signed deal, $5 million for 25% equity in my company. It wasn't just the money that mattered, though. It was the validation. For the first time in years, someone believed in me, not because of my last name, but because of what I had built. I had done it without my father's name, without the family wealth, without any of the advantages they had always thought I needed. Months later, my company, Beacon Ventures, was not only thriving, it was changing the game in clean energy. We had developed the most efficient energy storage system on the market. And the world was taking notice. But even more than the business success, I had reclaimed something much more important, my self-worth. I remember walking into a room filled with board members from my father's company, Pierce Capital, now on the brink of collapse. With my company's strength, I took control. Not out of revenge, but to prove that I could build something on my own. My father's eyes, filled with disbelief, were a reminder of everything I had overcome. He had never believed in me. But now, as I sat at the head of the table, I knew the real victory was in showing the world, and myself, that no one could define my worth but me. Remember, a person's true value isn't determined by their family name or the legacy they inherit. It's defined by what they dare to build, and what they refuse to let go of, even when the world looks down on them. To keep following life stories that inspire, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You'll hear more stories of resilience, passion, and the power of believing in yourself.